And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 75th episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. Our mission and goal is simple. We want to bring in-depth analysis and coverage for Indiana University sports to as many fans as possible across a multitude of modern platforms. We are recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on February 12th, 2019, where I'm your host, Noah Freeman, and here with me tonight is only one of my usual co-hosts, Nathan Christian. Say hi to everyone, Nathan.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening.
If you want to see us live and participate in the ongoing chat, catch us Tuesday evenings at 8:30 p.m. or on our YouTube page or our website. If you miss us for the live broadcast, you can subscribe to our show for free on whatever platform you listen to podcasts, so you can listen on your own time. Check out our Twitter and Facebook at the Hoosier Sound and at Indiana HQ and subscribe. All of that information is in our website, indianahq.com. All right, Hoosier Nation, it is time for some sports talk. On the docket for tonight, it is time to look at the cold, hard truth of this team. Coming out of one of the best wins in college basketball this season, the Hoosiers lost 2 games at home this weekend, both games they could and should have won, which added to the 4-game losing streak at Assembly Hall. Nathan and I are going to dive into the recent events and the cold, hard truth for this team. So wait till the end. We're each going to give one cold, hard truth for this team to wrap everything up. So, of course, last week was that feel-good episode of coming off of the Michigan State game. We hadn't had a good positive episode besides the India Franklin episode. We haven't had a good one in like over a month. Last week was the feel good episode. So I guess we spoke too soon, Nathan, because it was really, really high. We were all really good. And then this week it's just the complete opposite 180. But Nathan, let's just start with some overall thoughts you have on where this Hoosier team is as of February 12th, 2019, with an overall record of 13-11 and a conference record of 4-9.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, again, thanks to everyone for listening and tuning in wherever you are. But, it's just so frustrating. It's irritating. It's agitating to see this team who, in this current form, went to East Lansing and won last Saturday. And I, as well as I think a lot of others, were hoping they would ride the wave. We were hoping they could use that as a confidence booster. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, we saw them lose to a couple of teams that, at least according to Vegas, IU was the favorite. And now, all of a sudden, we're back to where we were, I think, before that win against Michigan State, where we're starting to ask, what are the problems? What needs to be fixed? We were fortunate enough at Indiana HQ to just cross the 1,000 Twitter follower threshold. And we're seeing all these mentions and questions and comments coming in. People want Archie gone. People are saying, be patient. Archie's all right. And again, IU fans are very emotional. They're very excitable when things go well. And that's fine. That's just the way the program is. Overall, though, I was very frustrated with 2 things in particular. And, maybe we need to take a step back away from the tournament selection and the at-large stuff, IU on the bubble, strength of schedule, net range stuff. Maybe we need to set that aside for a second. Right now, to me, IU seems to be lost. This is a team who, at least if there was one thing IU fans could hang their head on the last decade or so, is that when opponents came into Assembly Hall, it was going to be a raucous atmosphere. It was going to be hostile. IU was going to elevate their play at home. Instead, we've seen the complete opposite. In all 5 home games that IU has played since January 1st, they have had a 9-point deficit or more. And you said we have a 4-game home losing streak, but even in that game against Illinois, we trailed by 10. Oh, by the way, those 9-point deficits or larger have all happened in the first half. So this is a team that seems to be struggling out of and elevating their play. It's almost being sort of dampered by playing at Assembly Hall in front of 17,000 people. That's unbelievable. The second thing that continues to bother me is the jump shooting. It seems like in every single game IU plays, the jump shooting is struggling. We've seen what it can do as far as helping the team in a game like Michigan State where they shot 50%. But, it seems like that was the exception to the rule at this point.
Yeah, and you talk Assembly Hall. It's not even anything to laugh at, but it was yesterday or 2 days ago. I saw on my time hop something about was the I think 3 year anniversary, 2 or 3 year anniversary of when when number 4 Iowa came into Assembly Hall, and IU of course beat them, and they put out the statistic like out of how many years the amount of ranked teams that have gone down in Assembly Hall and everything, and I just I took a long, hard look at that, and I was just like, wow, even last year. I guess last year we didn't win a lot of games at home either, but just before that, it's the Assembly Hall factor, and it's nothing against the students in the atmosphere. I think especially at least for those big games, the students in the crowd are showing out. It's just where this organization is at the moment, and I don't want to bash the team too hard, just because then we're putting 100% on the blame for the rebuild not being here quite yet. But these buckle in for just a second. These are my thoughts, and I'm going to preface this by saying that this isn't an excuse, but that this just adds into everything. And here are all of my factors that I think have gone into what has just set up this season and where we are today. First, when Crean left, the roster was not the best roster in the world. Crean had his own system that was also very different than your average coach. You hire Archie, who has yet another system that is very different than most coaches. And you add that to a roster that isn't the best in the world, growing pains are bound to happen. We all knew that. But I think, at least as of now, the growing pains are just much longer than we might have all wanted. But fast forward to this year, the Big Ten schedule is longer. Teams are playing more games. Remember, we added 2 games this year to the Big Ten schedule. Instead of 18, it's now 20 games. So the season is extended. The beginning of the season, this team has to hang on by threads as Hoosier after Hoosier gets some sort of injury. The chemistry can't build. There's a senior class that basically consists of just one person, a junior class that consists of 2, where really only one of those people have been able to play because one of them has been injured the whole time. There's not a sense of upperclassmen leadership like a team that might have half of their team as juniors or seniors. Now, I'm not saying there's no leadership out of the juniors or the seniors, because I think that's quite the opposite. It's just a lot harder when you have a team that literally consists of 3 upperclassmen compared to another team that might have 5, 6, 7, 8 players that have been through the system. They know the ropes. More people can help those underclassmen. If you take it like that, Jawan technically has to take 4 or 5 guys under his wing to try and get them to know the ropes, instead of just talking to 1 or 2 people that might have not attracted to him, but just kind of gone more his way, more of his specific role, his position. But age starts to play a role. You add the injuries, you add the different systems. Now you're starting to see what we're seeing today. Now, here's where I start to get upset with the team, because that was all kind of defending a lot of the stuff. And Nathan alluded to this a lot, and he talked about this a lot, and I think this is where we're at. It's one thing to have talent to win. It's another team to have that talent and not use it. This is a team that can beat almost anyone in the entire league, literally, because we just saw it a week and a half ago. It's not a team that also had a 1 fluke win, so you can't say the MSU game was just a one-and-done deal. They did beat Marquette, which that win just keeps looking more and more impressive by the week. They did beat Louisville. They beat MSU. Even Butler, who, of course, isn't having a great season either, but they always play IU tough, and it's another non-conference power team that they got to play. And that's the part that frustrates me. A team that gets a lot of those big wins, then you lose 4 in a row at home. You had those 5 in a row double-digit deficits like Nathan talked about. The last 2 losses, Iowa. Yes, Iowa's a pretty good team right now, top 25 team, number 20 when they came in, but they were definitely not a team that IU should have lost to. And in fact, IU should have won that game. Then you have Ohio State, an Ohio State team that we talked about last week that was about the level of Indiana. You add the home factor, it should have been basically an easy win for Indiana. all for those same reasons, the same reasons that you lost to Iowa, same reasons that Indiana lost to Ohio State. They all go for every single loss, basically, that the 9 other losses have come from this season. And that's the specific part that frustrates me. Nathan, you talked about it before. I think everyone feels it that way now. And it's not that this team can't do it. They can do it, but they just can't do it consistently.
Yeah, and like you said, Noah, we've seen it this year. And I think, we saw it in November when they beat Marquette. December, they beat Louisville. And then, the January was bad, but they started February with a bang. It's not like, those were flukes. They played well and they won those games. I mean, it blows, you talk about crazy numbers that I've seen. It blows my mind even further that in the last 2 games, in that Iowa-Ohio State combo, the Hoosiers led for a grand total of 3 minutes and 23 seconds out of 80 minutes. How does that happen? I mean, literally a few days after IU lost to Iowa, Northwestern controlled that game against the Hawkeyes for almost the whole way. Now, they had a stunning collapse at the end, but that's besides the point. It was stunning to see not only IU lose those 2 games against Big Ten opponents, quality Big Ten opponents for sure. It was just how they were never really able to elevate their play. They weren't really able to thrive off the crowd. And that to me is a bigger concern than whether or not IU makes the tournament this year. And maybe they do. Again, the Big Ten is incredibly deep, incredibly talented. Heck, we might be sitting here in a week or a week and a day, depending on when we do this. And maybe IU wins at Minnesota on Saturday and then hopefully beats Purdue on Tuesday, a week from tonight. And all of a sudden, we're talking about, hey, look, IU's on the right side of the bubble instead of on the outside looking in. But again, I just wanted to take a step back and say, like, Assembly Hall, when it's rocking, is a really special place. It's one of the most intimidating, hostile atmospheres in college basketball. And IU's record has shown that over the last few years. And I just hope that perhaps as early as a week from tonight, it returns back to that level. But one other thing I mentioned was a 3-point shooting, Noah. And it's very frustrating to see a team with a good post player like Juwan Morgan, a good wing player like Romeo Langford, unable to find the right mix of guys to stand and hit, catch, and shoot threes. In the Big Ten in 2019, that's such a valuable weapon. It's becoming more and more prevalent in basketball. And, there are a couple factors here. One side is that you have previously established shooters struggling. A guy like Evan Fitzner, for example. I think Archie Miller and the coaching staff desperately were looking at Fitzner to provide a lift from the 3-point arc. Ideally, a guy like Robert Finney drives to the paint and kicks it out, or Romeo Langford slashes it in, fires it out to Fitzner or maybe Demezy Anderson to hit a 3. Except nowadays, it's rimming out. Fitzner was a 40% 3-point shooter in each of his first 3 years at St. Mary's. He's, I think, something like 2 for 20 in Big Ten play. It's a stunning decline for a once established perimeter shooter now to struggle. The other part of it is that there are a couple of guys on the team that are really good at 3-point shooting, Al Durham and Devontae Green. In a very important game at home on Sunday, and I don't know if you want to say must win, that's up for the fans to say, but I'll just say in a very important game for IU on Sunday, Al Durham not only didn't make a 3, he didn't take a 3. And that, to me, it doesn't necessarily fall on one person, but that's something to me that just stunned me when I went back and saw the box score. Al Durham, a guy who's at 40% of threes in Big Ten play, didn't even take one. How are you supposed to say you gave it your all when that sort of stuff happens?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think that's just going to be reminiscent of what we're about to get into. So taking a quick step back, Nathan just talked about next week on Tuesday. So I think now is a great time. We're not necessarily sure when we're going to record the podcast. I think as of now, I think we might just do a post-game show. I don't like to do that necessarily because I know I don't like to step on the toes of Assembly Call, even though obviously they're much bigger. It's just having the two shows. But whether it's going to be a Purdue-based show or just a regular show in general, that's probably where we're going to end up doing it. So look out for that. Check out our social media just to check any updates, because next week the game is at 7 and we have a couple more Tuesday games. So that's the only reason why Tuesdays will get dicey. But Nathan was talking about the game is on Saturday for Minnesota. So that's when they play that game. But we go back into, and let's just kind of use the Ohio State game as a jumping off place for a lot of these, we'll say, problems, I guess, that Indiana has, because I think they are problems, at least as of now. So you also look at Ohio State, it's kind of been the struggles they had have been the same struggles they've had the entire year. So really you could talk about Ohio State, but you can plug in X loss and it'll be the same thing. And I think let's start at the beginning. The slow starts. Now I was defending the slow starts, I think, a lot later than most people were, but now it's starting to tick me off. You know, it's something that you have struggled with almost the entire season, no matter if you won or if you've lost. You cannot go into a game in the first 10 minutes and score 2 points or 4 points under double-digit points. That's just something you can't do. Someone on the team, whether the coaching staff, I guarantee the coaching staff has addressed it in some way. Whether it's been the way you might have wanted it to or not, I guarantee they've addressed it some way. But someone on this team has to be like, give me the ball. I need to score, so we don't start with 2 points like we did against Ohio State, and it's 11-2 right after you blink. Going on to that, Indiana starts to come back, and you see a little bit of a run. They get back within a possession or two to get back within reach of Ohio State, which was great. I'm like, okay, they had a slow start, but they're coming back into it, and they're gonna keep going. You get about to just under 10 minutes left in the first half. Ohio State starts to go cold. Just as because of course it's always when whatever broadcasting system posts, it's like, oh, X team has gone on this long without scoring or something like that. Ohio State went over 4.5 minutes without scoring a single point in the under 10 minutes in the first half. Not just not making a field goal and making foul shots or something. They didn't score a single point for almost 5 minutes of gameplay. I went back because I was curious. I knew Indiana was still losing after Ohio State scored, which is a problem in itself. But I wanted to go back and see how much Indiana was losing by when that streak started for Ohio State. They were only down 6 points to Ohio State when they went cold. That is an opportunity, no matter if you're up 20 or down 50, that you have to take advantage of. Indiana only scored 4 points in those 5 minutes that Ohio State went scoreless. It is extremely rare for a team on any given game day to go almost 5 minutes, an entire quarter of a half, to not score a single bucket, and yet they only scored 2 baskets to keep going. And that is something that is just not acceptable when you're going into the Big Ten season, the Big Ten gauntlet of a season, and expecting wins. And I think that right there, I had to leave at halftime to go to a previous engagement. But from what I can tell, it was all the same kind of stuff. They ended up coming back. It was kind of like the Iowa game. They ended up coming back. It's a lot closer. Couple threes at the end, kind of dagger, and it was just kind of the same kind of stuff. And it was just the first half attitude. And I know I'm going on a long monologue. I think tonight is just Nathan and I just going back and forth with a long monologue. But I think a lot of these slow starts and being down in such a big hole, I think the beginning of the season is now starting to come back to bite us, because they could come back, and they kept coming back, and they won and they won and they won in November and December. I think now that they think it's not that it's okay, but I think they think it's like serviceable, and it's okay that they can start out slow. And they're like, okay, we got time to come back. We've got 30 minutes left in the game. We've got 25 minutes left in the game. We've got 35 minutes left in the game. But I think they keep thinking that every minute throughout the rest of the game. They get to halftime. All right, we got 20 minutes left. All right, we got 10 minutes left. All right, we got 5 minutes left. All right, we got 2 minutes left. We can still come back. But at some point, it's too late. You can't have that mentality the entire time. At some point, you need to try and put your foot on the pedal and try and actually get over that hump of starting to win the game. Like you said, winning, I don't remember what your statistic was, but just winning for X amount of time. They were not winning, and they were almost never within a one possession game almost the entire time against Ohio State. So, yeah.
Yeah, they led for 3 minutes and 23 seconds in the last 2 games. And I can't quite put into words how crazy that is. Last
2 games. I'll emphasize that.
As favorites. As favorites. 80. You're not facing Duke. You're not facing Tennessee, the #1 team in the country.
That's 80 total minutes, and they only led for just under 4 of those.
It's stunning. It's stunning. I can't, and both games were at home. And look, I get your point. You know, these slow starts have been tough. And again, you know, guys like Fran McCaffrey and Chris Holtman are great coaches, and they're going to have their teams prepared to play IU. And then you're going to see it with Izzo and Beeline and everyone in this. Every coach in this conference is really good. But one of the issues I've had with this coaching staff, and maybe I'm missing something, but I don't quite see any sort of drastic change at the start of these games that the coaches have implemented. One of the things I would pay attention, one of the things I've kind of paid attention to over the last handful of games in Big Ten play is, does IU mix it up? Do you do something different on offense or defense at the start of the game to sort of get your team into it? You know, sometimes you'll see football teams, for example, they'll try to run a no-huddle offense at the start or when their offense is struggling to sort of liven and make things more lively. I don't see IU doing anything like that. I don't see them trying a full court press at the start of a game. Maybe it's just a couple of possessions, and maybe you get beat. But, you know, it at least is something a coaching staff can do to implement some sort of energy and excitement and fire into the team. Or, you know, maybe one thing you can try to mix up is maybe play a couple possessions of 2-3 zone. And I know Archie Miller's pack line defense and his system is his thing, and I get it. And maybe that those teams bust you open and hit a couple threes and it all goes back and you say, oh, shoot, that was a terrible idea. But, you know, at least mixing it up, trying some different things. And also the starting lineup, personally, I feel like they have only tweaked it in minor ways. Something that I would like for the upcoming couple of games against Minnesota and Purdue is throw Deron Davis in the starting lineup. Throw Devontae Green. Those are a couple of guys that made a huge impact in your win against Michigan State. Deron Davis is the only player to finish positive in the plus-minus each of the last 2 games. So how about that? You know, try a couple of drastic things, and maybe that can get your team out to these good starts, especially at home.
Yeah, and I think coaching – when you're trying to talk about coaching, I think that's probably the hardest aspect of a program that you can really judge, because you can look at the play on the court and ultimately, yeah, a lot of like setting up plays, lineup changes, when to take a player out, all of the above will come from coaching, but what's happening on the court is happening from the players. So at some level, it's hard to really judge the coaches. And at some level, you can argue 100% for the coaches that Archie is making all of the right decisions. But then you could also go completely the opposite way and argue that he's not doing any of the right decisions. So I think that at least first is hard to judge in of itself, because just to play devil's advocate, Nathan, you talked about Deron starting. He's not ready because he's still injured. Devontae Green, he has so many bad games a lot of times. Why add that extra potential for him to add on to the poor start? Just playing devil's advocate, all of those, like, there's a side that you can see for like defending Archie Miller. But then, like you said, there's the other side. It's like, why haven't we seen some lineup changes? And then you could go back to the other side because the other guys haven't earned it in practice. So it's a really hard balance to judge the kind of stuff that the coaches are doing. And I know for a fact that Archie Miller really cares about this team, and he really cares about winning. That's definitely not part of it. without going into too much detail, I know because we now are able to have someone usually boots on the ground. We're usually able to have someone at every single game, and the person that was there last game when they were in the press conference talked about how quiet it was right after the game. This is the Ohio State game. And they just heard a lot of chatter. Like I said, not going into too many details, just a lot of chatter from potentially maybe the Ohio State media that were there just because it's sort of close and everything. And he turns around and it was Archie just talking up a storm, basically, right after the Ohio State game. He really cares. He really wants this game this team to do well. He really wants this team to get into it. And it's frustrating because a lot of people are calling for his job. You can talk about trying to change things. Why not leave Deron Davis in when, even though he has some fouls, or Juwan Morgan, all that kind of stuff? I think it's something interesting to talk about, and we can keep talking about it in the next coming weeks because it's something we can still watch for. And like you said, look for a change to the start of the game. Look for a change to how he's addressing things. And I think he is, but we'll just have to get there. So we're going to take a quick break. And when I mean a quick break, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a more positive note. Who won the week? So Nathan, in a new segment, we're going to talk about who won the week. So within the past 7 days, out of all the Indiana University sports, who's won the week?
For me, the team that won the week was the IU softball team. And it was it's been an unbelievable start to their season. They had won their first few games to start the year, but the real crowning achievement came in a win over number 6 Georgia in a tournament that took place down in Florida. The Hoosiers won 6-4 back on Sunday. They got a big game-changing 2-run home run from Grayson Radcliffe in the 7th inning. And IU all of a sudden found themselves in the top 25 after the first few games to start the year. And this is an unbelievable accomplishment. The Hoosiers, I don't believe they've been ranked since around 1990. I don't think I had that year exactly right. But it's very difficult for a baseball team or a softball team in the Midwest to rise to prominence. It's not like football or football or basketball, where you kind of see it evenly spread out. In baseball and softball, a lot of the best players either go to the minors in baseball or they go down south or to the West Coast where the weather is warmer in softball. But this group that IU's got, they've gotten off to a fantastic start, undefeated. They've got a big win over a top 10 team in the country, and they're ranked in the top 25, a start of dreams.
Yeah, I assumed I missed it. You said I was checking the Kentucky LSU score, which at the moment LSU might win. But did you say you talked about softball team, right?
Yes.
Okay, softball. Yes, and I'm going to add on to that. In the FAU First Pitch Classic, that was the tournament of basically of games that they were able to play Friday, Saturday, Sunday. When they went 3-0, that was the first time they had gone 3-0 since 1994. They went 4-0, and it was the same thing. I guess they went 4-0 in 1994. Then, like you said, Sunday you've got that incredibly big matchup against number 6 Georgia, which I'm not too much of an IU softball nut. I don't know too much about recent history, but any win over a top 10, let alone the number 6 team in the nation at the beginning of the season when you're not supposed to have all of your stuff ready and put together yet, getting that win, capping off the weekend, going 5-0 for the first time since 1990 is incredible. So Ben on Twitter actually asked, can you talk about the promising start to the Indiana softball program that they're off to this season? And not enough good things to say. I'm not, like I said, I'm not enough of an IU softball nut to know if this is going to be promising or not. Maybe they just had a really hot streak and they're not going to do as good the rest of the season. Maybe this means they're going to keep working their way up into the top 15, top 10, but great start. Start following them. Listen to the Hoosier Sound offs if you don't, because I'll update you through them as they start going through the season. But we did want to talk about a lot of that. We had a lot of great questions coming in, so we're going to go into the next segment, which we're going to talk about a little briefly, just go into some of our observations between a lot of the players on the team and their play, at least recently. And we're only going to talk about the guys that really see time on the floor. So really just Rob, Devontae, Al, Romeo, Justin, Jawan, and we'll throw in Duran in there since he started to come talk about it. But let's start with Rob. Of course, at the beginning of the month, awful concussion that sidelined him for a while. I think just took him out of his chemistry, his role that he was kind of in. He was doing really well, and just no fault of his own. He was just able to get out of it, and he couldn't run or just get back into it. And I think also then that on top of the freshman slump that most people will hit, which Romeo is in, and we'll talk about that. The freshman slump, I think that's why at least maybe you don't see Rob lighting up the stat sheet as you might have. But then again, you look back and Rob usually didn't light up the stat sheet. He's been a guy that's kind of been that old traditional point guard where he facilitates everything. He brings the ball up. He looks to pass first, get an assist or do something. And if not, he's just going to drive it down the lane, even though he's smaller than a lot of the other people. But what have your thoughts been of Rob, at least probably the past couple weeks since he's been able to really get back into it?
Yeah, I mean, make no mistake about it. An injury like a concussion can who knows? It can really affect your improvement and your development as a basketball player to a very unpredictable degree. But I still see a lot of positive in Rob Phinisee. And I don't want this to be all negative, negative, negative. I feel like Phinisee does bring some energy. He brings some sensibility to the team at times. And I think he's great on defense. And that's the area of the court I focus on with Rob Phinisee. Every night, he's going out there and he's guarding the opposing team's point guard. And I remember what he did to Marcus Howard against Marquette. He did a great job against that guy who's gaining a bunch of National Player of the Year attention. So as long as Phinisee can continue to help the Hoosiers on from a defensive standpoint, whether it's this year or down the road, I think that's where most of his value will come to helping the team. But at the same time, I would like to see Rob, continue to improve his game offensively. Attack to the basket when you see a driving lane. Feel free to take a three in rhythm when it's in the flow of the offense. Those are the things that I've kind of observed over the last few weeks.
Oh, yeah, I agree. And I think also he's just going to be an incredible asset to the program moving forward. Even if he doesn't really shoot up this season, remember, he's a freshman. He's going to go great. He's going to go great with the players coming in next season as well. But this is not an excuse. This is more of buckle in. March is going to be an incredible time. In about just 1 month from now, LSU. You think of LSU, you don't really think basketball, you think football. LSU, of course, they're doing much better this year in basketball. They just beat number 5 Kentucky at Kentucky. So, man, the tournament this year is just going to be awesome because everyone's beating everyone. Again, the Hoosiers should not be losing this much, but everyone's beating everyone, and it's just going to be awesome to watch. And Michigan State also just got back beating Wisconsin at Wisconsin after their losing streak. So.
Yeah, everyone can beat everyone, including IU. I mean, the Hoosiers have had great wins. It's just a matter of putting it together more frequently.
Duke lost, and that just sums up basically the season to Syracuse at Duke. But let's get into some more IU stuff. Okay, Devontae. We could sum up and we could be done with this and say good Devontae, bad Devontae, because you have a game where he's holding where he's basically the only guy scoring on the team and trying to keep lifting this team up against Iowa and then Ohio State. He didn't have as bad of a game as he usually does, but he definitely didn't have the kind of game he had the past couple of times. So I guess briefly, because we could go into a lot of talk about Devontae, but what have your thoughts been with Devontae?
This is another area where I'm kind of hoping Archie Miller makes an adjustment, because it seems to me quite clearly that Devontae Green is either the best three-point shooter on this team or second best. What I would like to see going forward is I want to see Rob Phinisee and Romeo Langford on the court with Devontae Green so that they can drive to the rim, they can get to the basket, and then maybe dish it out to Green, who plays more of a shooting guard role. He still shot 1 for 3 beyond the arc against Iowa, and he was still, I believe, 2 for 5 against Ohio State from three-point land. So, I mean, use that to your benefit. He still does turn it over a little bit too much for my liking.
Yeah. And to that point, too, in Devontae's credit, he has gotten better at toning down his mistakes. To his credit, it used to be worse, and especially last season, we saw a lot of that. But to his credit, he's toning down the mistakes, and I think he's taking he's really trying to actually work on that and trying to get that. I think he's conscious of that. But, and don't talk too soon about our 3-point shooters. Romeo's heating up. Romeo's heating up. We're going to talk about him in a second. But Al, I think everyone can say you loved his energy because he's been, at least at the really down times, the guy that's really wanting to just have some sort of energy on the court. But what else have you seen from him besides watching his finger snap and go in multiple places?
That was disgusting. But you know, it was funny. I was fortunate enough to go to both the Purdue and Northwestern road games for Indiana HQ. And one thing that stood out in person is how important Al Durham is from a rebounding standpoint for this team. If you see, you know, Al Durham, when he's on the court, not only can he provide a bit of a 3-point boost, this is a guy who I think is one of the better rebounders on the team. And I'm not sure how the stats play that out. But as far as I'm concerned, he's a guy who has a lot of great instincts in the lane. He is almost always in the right position when grabbing rebounds. And I think since he's a guard also, it's also helpful for the Hoosiers when he gets the rebound and he can push it up the floor. So, you know, this is a guy who still has 2 more years after this season. I'm really looking forward to seeing Finney and Durham and IU's backcourt for the future.
Yeah, I agree. And at the end of last season, I wasn't too keen on watching Al because he was really not playing that well. He had a great start to his freshman season, but then just kind of went away. But out of the past month, I think he's been, besides Duran, at least the past 2 weeks, but for the entire span of January during all losing the last 9 of 10, I think Al has been at least the one, at least for me, the brightest spot, at least for the future as well. Going on to Romeo. There's been a lot of talk about how, not a bust. I don't think people have gone too far to say a bust, but I think disappointed, at least in Romeo the past month. And I also, here's my thought. Yes, of course, he's not lighting up like we don't think, but I think we put really high expectations on him coming in as a top 5 recruit. Of course, we haven't gotten a guy like him, at least as highly ranked as him, in a really long time. But he's also being compared to, in this specific class, you've got Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett, these guys that could potentially be some of the best, potentially, I'm the guy to hold the reins the most, especially for Zion, but could potentially be some of the best players to ever play the game of basketball at some point. And you never know. And he's being compared to that. You also, if you were not watching, if you were not at the game against Ohio State, they really talked a lot about Romeo and how he's right now the 3rd best scorer in IU history as a freshman at the moment, 3rd best, and he has potential to get into the 2nd best. I don't think anyone's really going to ever touch Eric Gordon during his freshman season, but 3rd best. So he's still averaging, I don't remember after last game, but it was 17.6 points per game. He's still getting a lot of stuff done. But what else have you seen from Romeo?
It all there, Noah. I mean, I think I'll put myself in the group of people that may have had expectations a little bit too high for Langford. You know, I've still seen a couple, throughout the course of the season, there have been a couple things that have gotten me. For example, I remember a couple times against Nebraska, he wasn't exactly busting it back on defense after his teammate turned it over, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, he is still IU's primary sort of on-ball scorer. You know, Juwan Morgan can score when he's sort of put in the proper situation. But, you know, look, in crunch time, there's no question IU's going to rely on Romeo Langford to hit the shots. And even against Ohio State, I was like kind of hoping and willing that last shot and trying to see if it could go in. I don't know. But all I'm saying is this is a guy who is obviously he was a highly touted high school senior coming into this year. He's a highly touted the NBA draft next season. This is a player who could potentially put IU into the NCAA tournament, in the Big Ten tournament, or, you know, if somehow IU turns this thing around and gets in on an at-large basis, he can help you get a couple of wins in the big dance. Who knows? There's still plenty of time left. We could see Langford completely change his legacy for all we know in the next month or month and a half.
Yeah, and if the season doesn't go how we plan and we keep losing games like we have been and not really winning much, don't take him for granted. There's a reason guys like him don't come around very often. Don't take him for granted. Enjoy a lot of the basketball he's putting on the court, because I think a lot of the good stuff he does get overshadowed. Look at just the way he dribbles. Look at the way he finds the basket. Look at the way he scores. Look at the way he just creates space. Look at the way he gets steals at Ohio State. That his defense is just he had good defense, but it's just getting even better through Archie. Look for a lot of the good stuff. Find some of that positive stuff, especially if the season keeps going as sour. But I think as of recently, the Justin, the next guy, has kind of turned into one of those more, and we keep making, and it's all going to come back from Troy, just good Troy, bad Troy. But we talked about that with Devontae, and I think Justin, at least as of the last month, kind of fits into that category as well. You've got a lot of great games from Justin, games that you could see if he keeps doing that all the time that he gets into the NBA. But then you've got other games where it's not the complete opposite, but it's pretty close to the complete opposite. And I know everyone has bad games, and of course this team has its faults, and a lot of that could also, a lot of some of his play could play into that. But the one point that I have started to get really upset with him about is was it the Iowa game? I think that he was on the floor for something, and you saw him just slowly get back up, barely jog to the other end of the court. I think IU was on offense there, then didn't even get back for defense or something. And that's the kind of effort that anyone can get frustrated with. And to Archie's credit, he pulled him out right away. But there have just been a couple times where he's just been lackadaisical, like physically lackadaisical, not running back or something like that.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think it's really easy to, in general, for people to sort of sweep things under the effort and energy rug. I've seen that a lot, like I said, on the Indiana HQ Twitter account, and just different IU basketball fans' opinions overall. I actually don't think the effort has been too much of a problem for this team overall. In fact, I think it's been fine outside of maybe the Nebraska game. But as far as Justin Smith goes, there's still certain things, that, like you said, there's certain things he does where you go, wow. And then there are other things he does where you go, wow. And whether it's a mid-range jump shot that he airballs or an inability at times to grab a rebound, sometimes the ball slips out of his hand. I mean, these are things that I'm hoping, again, Smith, a young player, still has time ahead of him. I want to see him make those improvements. Maybe refine your mid-range game a little bit. Maybe improve your ability to secure every rebound that comes your way. Those are the things I'm going to be looking at.
Yeah. On to the next person. Juwan, the leader of this team, the guy that surprised everyone going from his sophomore to junior year. And this is my thought, and this is what I was just thinking more about Juwan, because I think a lot of it is the same, not necessarily the same as of Romeo, but I think the expectations, and they should. He's a senior. He needs to have a lot of expectations placed on him. He can't have even a mediocre game because it's going to look like a bad game. But I think, at least I think this might be playing into it for some people, is we saw the growth he had from sophomore, junior year, the growth he went from junior even into senior year, that he just kept improving, and he kept going up. And there's a lot of room that he could still keep going with. But I think he's not exceeding, at least at the same exact level that he was. He was skyrocketing upward. And I think he's still improving a lot. But I think it's just, instead of going straight up, it's just going a little bit to the side and still upward, to where he's not everyone thought he would be this all-American type of player. And he definitely had the potential to be, but he had to keep doing a lot of things incredibly right. And also, to his defense, the team has not functioned the way that he probably would have been able to grow around that all-American type of status. But he also has not been bad at all. You look at a lot of, even some of the stats, if you want to look at stats, because that's what the hard proof, it still hasn't been bad. You just might not think he's just been the most outstanding player. But what have your thoughts been with Juwan?
Yeah, for Rob Finney, I said things that that I kind of focus on with him are on defense. With Juwan Morgan, his strengths are clearly on offense. I mean, this is a guy who is he's very crafty in the post area within 15 feet. He's capable of getting fouled upwards of 7 or 8 times a game. And that's why I was more surprised as surprised as anyone that against Ohio State, Morgan took 7 shots, 4 of which were 3-pointers. And just from a big picture standpoint, I'm just saying, is that the best strategy for IU to win this basketball game? And to me, that answer was no. And going forward, whether it's Minnesota or Purdue or the games coming up, there's still a home game against Michigan State, a home game against Wisconsin. You go to the road at Iowa. Those are games where I need to see Juwan Morgan, for the most part, parked within 15 feet of the basket and just going to work inside. And it's too bad we couldn't see him do that against Michigan State because he picked up that shoulder injury. But when he does that, we can see him have a performance like he had against Butler, where he was the single most dominant player on that court.
Yeah, and then the foul trouble too. He's kind of a game where he gets a lot of fouls and then almost no fouls. So good and bad right there. Well, let's go on to De'Ron Davis. And I think this is going to be more of a bright spot because I gave him all of the praises last week, and he deserves all the praises because, I mean, just to rehash some of the things I talked about last week, he's been injured for forever. It doesn't seem like it just because he's gotten into games, and he's gotten into games for the majority, actually, of his sophomore and junior season, even though he's played I haven't done the minutes, but it's been a really, really small percentage of minutes that he's actually played in both his sophomore and junior year. So just been able to having him back. And I talked about last week how he played 25 minutes, which is tied for the second most minutes that he's played his entire career at Indiana. Not just in conference play, not just even that goes back to his freshman year and his sophomore year when he was completely healthy and in the best shape that he's been in. Just a great spot. The team plays better when they have De'Ron, and I think he's one of the reasons. You see the way he's playing and the team reacts around him, and he's one of the reasons you think, why don't we have a big guy like that every single like he graduates? Why don't you get another big guy in there? Just because it really spreads the floor out. You always want a 3-point shooter because it forces the defense to play up on you, and it opens the lane up for that kind of stuff. It's the same kind of thing, but backwards. You have a big guy that can bang down low. You have to add more people for a double team to try and go over, and it just opens stuff up. And De'Ron has started to play that and play it so well because you looked again at the Michigan State game. He had, 4 assists in addition to all of the buckets that he was making because he was seeing that double team was coming to him. It didn't phase him. He didn't turn the ball over. He kicked it out to someone that was open that their defender came to help for the double team with. And he's just been not the lone bright spot because I talked about Al, but just in terms of he just hasn't really played poorly in the last couple of weeks that he's been able to be out in the court. And it's just great to see him back because he's able to play. You never want to see a player take out that much time, but he just makes the team better all around.
Yeah, and to your point, no, he had 7 assists against Iowa. That Michigan State wasn't a one-time thing. He had 7 assists against Iowa, and then he even had a couple against Ohio State when IU had only 11 overall. So, for that reason, even if he, look, he played 22 minutes against Iowa. He played 16 against Ohio State because of some foul trouble. If you're telling me that I get 18 minutes out of De'Ron Davis for a guy who is an upperclassman, who has shown to be a very steadying presence for this team, just personally, I would like to see him on the court to start a game. I think ideally my starting 5 for Minnesota would be Finney, Green, Langford, Morgan, and Davis, and see how that goes. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and of course we're not doctors. We don't know when De'Ron is fully able to get back in, but I think at least as of the past couple of games, and especially get this really, really long break this week from Sunday all the way to Saturday that they get off, maybe he starts to get back better. But let's move into some questions because usually we try and gloss over this. So we're going to get into a little, just talk about some of the questions. So I liked a lot of the questions some of the people sent this week. And again, send your questions in, comment, tweet, all that kind of stuff. We've got the newsletter, which is up and running. We've got a lot of great emails sending out. So sign up for that, indianahq.com/subscribe. Really, check it out. We only send out one email a week, so it's everything tied in one spot. Check it out. If you don't like it, you can unsubscribe, just like all normal emails. But we talked about Ben's softball question on Twitter. Chris on Twitter, how do you think they will integrate Race Thompson into the lineup for IU since he's back now? For that comment, first I'm going to say I think we've thought Race has been able to play for the past like 2 or 3 games or something that we thought would come in, but he's just going to be ready when he is, because the concussion was so bad that he just hasn't been able to work out. And I think now it's the physical aspect of things. And I trust Archie and I trust the team that he's just not able to get onto the court to play even a little bit of meaningful, significant minutes. But how to integrate him, I think it's just kind of the role like Demezi and Evan and Cliff have kind of been playing. It's just ease him in, get him a couple minutes, see how he does. I think he's going to play better than them, but he's not going to be able to run very long. Just see what he does. Put him in for 30 seconds when you're giving Jawan that extra 30 seconds of a breather before a media timeout or something.
Yeah, it was. I don't want to misquote Race Thompson, but he had mentioned some pretty scary stuff as far as his concussion recovery goes. It's always it's different for each person. It's always unpredictable. At a bare minimum, in all honesty, I think IU fans should probably expect very little from him the rest of this season. I'm looking forward to seeing him in Candy Stripes next year. That's for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, with concussions, I was just talking to someone recently at school. They said their brother and their brother, they had a concussion one time, and basically they would go through school and pass out in the middle of the day because of the concussion. It really does affect people differently. So hopefully he's getting better, and hopefully he's able to stay healthy going forward, because we really do want to see him. And it's taken him 2 years to start playing, and poor guy, he hasn't been able to play a game. We go into Tyler's question on Twitter. Do critical IU fans have any sort of impact on how the players are playing due to the amount of pressure we put on them? They say to ignore it, but we all know college kids don't stay off social media. And I think that's a great question. Kind of the same thing we were talking about with India, just with the recruits and seeing everything. You're going to see a lot of it. And I think, to quote India, she talked about and she made the joke, growing thicker skin. And I think that honestly plays a factor into it, because there's always going to be, even if Indiana was #1 in the nation, there's always going to be someone that is going to criticize you. There were people that were criticizing this IU team after the Michigan State win, which baffles me, but people were. They're going to find some way to criticize you for anything. So I think you just kind of have to brush it off. But like Tyler said, they do find this. When Devontae Green got suspended, he posted, "You got what you want," or something along those lines. Basically, just they see it. I think it's going to have to be, like India said, thicker skin, kind of let it bounce off of you. Don't let it take you too personally, because you're wearing an Indiana uniform. No matter who you are, you could be Zion Williamson himself, LeBron James himself, Michael Jordan himself. If you're not getting wins and not winning national titles, there's going to be someone that's going to be criticizing you.
Yeah, and on that note, I mean, I will say one thing. And look, there are definitely the irrational folks who, tweet at high schoolers, and even I'll expand that to players on the current roster, saying things like, "Oh, you should leave," or "This isn't a good place to play." I mean, don't do that. But all I'm going to say is, IU does have a passionate fan base, and that does attract certain types of high school players. In fact, what do they say sometimes? Like, if your parents don't yell at you, it means they don't care. Something along those lines, right? I mean, IU fans do care. They're very emotional, and they ride the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows. And I get it. And that is appealing to certain people. And I'm sure it was appealing to Archie Miller when he signed on for the job. At Dayton, frankly, just the quantity of fans aren't there. Whereas at IU, you see every single game, there are 15,000 people at the games cheering their team on. The hashtag IUBB trends almost every single game. It's part of the deal. Now, at the end of the day, though, you still can't cross the line. And I think that's where I don't think it turns off recruits. Obviously, I'm not in their shoes, but I think you made a good point about the comments that India made when she was on this show a few weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly. So, like Tyler said, they say they ignore it. It's hard not to, but it's just kind of just, I guess, having to live with it. And it's kind of like the same thing living as a celebrity. There's going to be people coming at you from all sides. But Rob on Twitter, one and done situation sucks. Ruining college basketball. That's an entire segment in itself. I want to say there are a lot of people that disagree with that. I agree with that. But he says, how about this? And he's giving a situation basically to fix the one and done situation. So a kid can declare for the draft. If he's not picked in the lottery, he can go back to school. Meaning, once the last lottery pick has been made, any underclassman not picked comes off the draft board, and he had a question mark and then hashtag one and done. So do you want to explain, at least, Nathan, what you thought he was meaning by this question? And I am sorry, Rob. No, it's not our Rob from Indiana HQ. It's another Rob. We're sorry if we're misinterpreted the question, but Nathan.
Yeah, so as far as the lottery pick term goes, that's the first 14 picks of the NBA draft. Basically, if your team doesn't make the playoffs, you get thrown into the lottery and you draft whoever you want. According to Rob's point, he basically said, look, if a guy like Romeo Langford goes to the NBA draft next year and nobody picks him in the top 14, Langford, who probably got some information that said, oh, you're going to be a highly drafted player, according to Rob, he's saying, hey, Romeo, you can return to school if you so choose. To me, I just think it really throws a wrench into draft day and for NBA teams in general, and I'm not really defending them, but I just think there's a lot of risk involved. But, I do agree with Rob that, there's probably a better way to handle these one and dones. Frankly, in a few years, I don't remember the exact year, I believe high schoolers will have the option to go straight to the NBA, and like you said, 2021.
Yeah, I forget the details. We talked about it on a podcast a while ago, and there are stipulations to that we'd have to talk over again and everything. And at least to his specific situation, I think the only hard part would be, what if that 15th player that gets drafted, what if that 15th team that has that draft slot drafts him? What happens then? Because it's kind of hard in the moment, I guess, to see like, oh, I didn't get drafted in the top 14, I'm going to leave. And then it kind of messes everything up, especially like that quickly because it's only 10 or so minutes.
Yeah, so. And there are some 5-star freshmen this year that absolutely wouldn't mind playing for a playoff team in the NBA. I mean, would Romeo Langford rather play for a team like the Knicks or the Suns that seem to be losing every year? Or, maybe he goes to a team like Utah that wins every season. I mean, every player is different.
Yeah, and maybe he doesn't get the like $2 or $3 million deal his very first time, but it doesn't mean he's not going to get it 3 or 4 years down the road. And OG Anunoby on the Raptors, and he's doing pretty good, and he's still making a living for himself. But Sudden, Nathan's brother, had a question in here. Does 18 and 13 get you in advance? So his situation, you got to win 5 of the last 7 games, which gets you a, like he said, overall record of 18 and 13, conference record of 9 and 11. I think that's the important part because I think everyone has talked about what does your conference record have to be to end up winning. So I think so. A lot of now after Ohio State, many draft boards have draft the lotteries, brackets, whatever, have taken them off the board. A lot of them. There are still some brackets and bracketologists that have Indiana still on the board after both the Iowa and the Ohio State loss. So I think winning 5 of the last 7 games to get you some momentum, you get close to 500 in the conference. You've got those, like everyone says, you've got those Marquette, Louisville, Michigan State wins, which as of right now would be a 2, a 3, and a 4 seed basically in the tournament. Just adding on to that, I think we have an almost 0% shot if we only win 3 games the rest of the way. I think we have a slight chance-ish if we get 4 more wins. I think there's arguments, but then you got 5, you definitely have your argument. What about you, Nathan?
That's a great question, if you ask me. All I'm gonna say is that as far as this goes, I don't know how many teams I will compete with on the bubble that have wins like Louisville, Marquette, and at Michigan State. And, you can even add a neutral site win over Butler to that mix. I don't know if there are other teams on the bubble, like St. John's, just to throw one out there, that have that kind of, hit list. But at the end of the day, something I think that goes a little bit understated, and I don't think the selection committee is allowed to do this. I think it's frowned upon. I can't help but think that how you play going into Selection Sunday matters. And, IU ends the season with a couple of winnable games against Illinois and Rutgers. Maybe you win a game against Michigan State at Assembly Hall or Wisconsin at Assembly Hall. And then maybe you knock off Purdue in the Big Ten tournament, or maybe you knock off Purdue next week. But how you play going into Selection Sunday, I think, does make a difference, even though technically it's not supposed to. If IU reels off a few wins in a row, I do think 18-13 will get them in.
Exactly, and I talked about the 3 quad 1 wins that we have. You beat Purdue next week. They just lost. But you beat Purdue next week. There's going to still, I would think, a top 20 team even with that loss next week. You beat another team at home. You've got Wisconsin that still might not be ranked. You've got Michigan State. You still have a lot of opportunities to get quality wins. And I know this is a sour team. I'm going to end this on this note. I know this is a sour team for a lot of Hoosier fans. Syracuse. There is, and I'm going to keep going back to this, there is a reason the committee put them in the last few seasons. There really is. They have had almost an identical, more or less, type of situation going into the tournament, having a lot of big wins, but a lot of losses. Look how they did in the tournament. They made the tournament exciting because they beat a lot of big teams, and that's what they want. They want excitement in the tournament. You have Indiana, they've got a lot of losses, but you saw that they could get those big wins. That's all that matters. You get into the tournament, it's anyone's game. Indiana can knock off a huge opponent. It adds that excitement, and that's what you want surrounding this type of tournament when no one really, for the most part, a lot of the country doesn't care much about college basketball until it's March. So you add that kind of excitement. I think those big wins are really on Indiana's side. And again, like a lot of bracketologists have said, the bottom parts of the at-large bids are very mediocre. So Indiana shot itself in the foot against Ohio State. Say what?
Just win, baby.
Yeah. Indiana shot themselves in the foot against Ohio State. I personally said, I don't think you can get into the tournament if you can't beat Ohio State on your home floor. Technically, you still can. And technically, they can still get in. They got 7 games. It starts on Saturday at 2:00 p.m. on ESPN2 against Minnesota. It starts then. They just got to take it one game at a time. Don't worry about the seeding. Committee's going to do it themselves. All you got to do is play. All you got to do is win. All you got to do is win. That wraps it up for our 75th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate your support. I'm going to be back this Friday for another edition of the Hoosier Sound Off. Thank you again to our live audience for coming out and participating in the chat. It makes it a lot more interesting to just talk with you guys during the show. Make sure to stay tuned through our updates on Twitter at the Hoosier Sound. Subscribe to us on YouTube or however you listen to podcasts. Visit our website at indianahq.com so you can get all that information in one place. As always, like I said earlier, send us your questions. So comment, chat, email us, admin@indianahq.com so we can get your questions on our next episode. Lastly, this is really important. If you enjoy our show, leave us a review. Tell a friend. That's the important part. Tell a friend. Share our links. That's how we like to really grow this podcast so we can try and reach more passionate fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.